Elaine Whitmore was the kind of grandmother everyone trusted. Kind eyes, warm smile, and always seen gently wheeling her granddaughter Lily through the park. But behind that perfect image was a secret so dark, so cruel, it would shock an entire town and leave a nation in tears. Elaine Whitmore had always been the kind of woman who made people feel safe. In Willowbrook, a sleepy town nestled between forested hills and winding rivers, she was the soft-spoken grandmother who waved from her porch every morning and handed out cookies during the holidays. Her hair was always perfectly curled, her clothes tidy and pressed. She wore floral aprons that smelled of cinnamon and lavender, and her house, white with green shutters, was always spotless. Everyone admired her dedication to her granddaughter, Lily, who had lived with her since the age of 5 after the tragic car accident that killed Lily's parents and left her unable to walk. Elaine stepped into the role of caregiver without hesitation. The townspeople often said she had a heart of gold. They saw her pushing Lily's wheelchair to the Sunday service, reading to her in the park, and gently brushing the child's long brown hair. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a picture-perfect life, a testament to love and strength in the face of hardship. But something didn't quite add up, and no one ever thought to look closer. Elaine was fiercely private, never allowing visitors past the living room. She claimed she didn't want to disturb Lily's routine. Friends dropped off casseroles and handmade gifts at the door, which Elaine accepted with a polite smile but rarely reciprocated. She was always too busy with Lily's needs, and people, believing her intentions pure, didn't press further. As the years went on, Elaine's presence in town slowly began to fade. She stopped attending events, started missing church, and became increasingly withdrawn. Neighbors chalked it up to old age and the burden of caring for a disabled child. But even as the lights in her home stayed on late into the night, no one knocked to see if she was okay. Behind those closed doors, the pressure was mounting. Elaine's savings were dwindling, her health was quietly deteriorating, arthritis made lifting Lily more difficult, and forgetfulness had started to creep into her daily life. Her only source of income was the small government assistance check that came each month for Lily's care. Bills were piling up. Her once meticulous garden became overgrown, the porch paint chipped and faded. Lily hadn't been to a doctor in over a year. Elaine told neighbors she preferred home remedies and disliked hospitals. No one questioned her. But even as she carefully managed her image in public, Elaine was slipping into paranoia behind the scenes. She started locking doors that had never been locked. She drew the blinds tighter and unplugged the house phone. She became convinced that outsiders wanted to take Lily away from her. The truth was, Elaine's love had twisted into something darker, something obsessive and controlling. She believed she was the only one capable of protecting Lily, even if that meant cutting the girl off from the world entirely. And in her isolation, fear began to fester into something far more dangerous. The woman once known for her warm smile and gentle hands was no longer the same, and no one in Willowbrook could have imagined just how far Elaine was willing to go to keep her secret intact. The morning Lily disappeared was unusually quiet. A thick fog had rolled into Willowbrook overnight, shrouding the narrow streets and tree-lined yards in a silvery haze. Elaine Whitmore placed a call to the police just after 8 a.m., her voice steady and almost too calm. She said Lily was gone. She claimed she had gone downstairs to prepare breakfast, oatmeal with apples, Lily's favorite, and when she returned, the bed was empty, the window wide open, and the girl nowhere in sight. The wheelchair remained by the bedside untouched. Within the hour, squad cars arrived. Officers moved carefully through the tidy home, noting its eerie silence. Lily's bedroom was meticulously arranged, books stacked neatly, stuffed animals, aligned on a shelf, and a blanket still folded at the foot of the bed. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints outside the window, and no trail leading away from the house. The wheelchair's placement didn't make sense, if Lily had somehow left on her own. How did she manage it without her only means of mobility? News of Lily's disappearance spread quickly. Flyers were printed and posted across town. Volunteers joined search parties that combed through nearby woods, rivers, and old sheds. Helicopters hovered over the forests. Local news stations aired interviews with concerned neighbors, and tearful school staff who remembered Lily's bright smile and quiet intelligence. Elaine appeared on screen, pleading for her granddaughter's safe return, wringing her hands as she stood by the garden gate. Despite the growing panic, investigators felt something was off. Elaine's emotional display seemed rehearsed. Her account of the morning shifted slightly each time she was asked to repeat it. In one version, she said she heard a noise in the night, but thought nothing of it. In another, she mentioned seeing Lily asleep just an hour before vanishing. Her stories were peppered with gaps and contradictions. A knock on the neighbor's door confirmed a new concern. No one had seen Lily in nearly 2 weeks. Elaine had told everyone that Lily was recovering from a cold and needed rest. Concerned but trusting, the neighbors believed her. Police checked school records and found that Elaine had withdrawn Lily months earlier, citing homeschooling as the reason. But there were no records of any tutoring or online schooling since. Elaine's house had one security camera facing the front yard, installed years earlier after a break-in scare. When investigators asked for the footage, she claimed the camera had stopped working. A technician later confirmed it had been manually disconnected from its power source. Even more troubling, Elaine had never reported any maintenance issues, despite claiming to rely on it for peace of mind. The search effort slowed as days turned to weeks. No new leads emerged, and Elaine's behavior grew increasingly peculiar. She refused to allow further searches of her home, insisting she needed privacy to grieve. Still, the unease lingered. Something didn't sit right with the detectives. Lily hadn't simply vanished, and in the quiet, uncomfortable gaps in Elaine's story, a darker truth began to whisper just beneath the surface. When detectives returned to Elaine Whitmore's home for a second, more thorough investigation, their focus shifted to the basement. Elaine had previously brushed off questions about the lower level, claiming it was just a storage space, unused, for years. But as doubts about her version of events grew, the officers pushed for access. Elaine reluctantly produced a rusted old key from a kitchen drawer and handed it over with trembling fingers. The door groaned open to reveal a narrow stairwell cloaked in dust and shadows. The smell hit them first, dampness mixed with something less identifiable but far more disturbing. Flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing cluttered shelves, filled with decades-old knickknacks, broken furniture, and boxes stacked high. But it was what they found tucked behind a faded curtain in the far corner that made their hearts sink. There, hidden behind piles of newspapers and paint cans, was an old twin mattress on the floor. The blanket covering it was worn thin and stained. Next to it sat a small table with empty food wrappers, a cracked plastic cup, and a battery-operated lantern. On the wall were faint scratch marks, impossible to ignore. In another corner, they found a large metal trunk secured with a heavy latch. When opened, it revealed personal items that should have been upstairs in Lily's room. Her favorite storybook, a small stuffed bear with a missing eye, and a pink sweater folded neatly on top. At the bottom of the trunk lay a journal. Its pages, filled in Lily's shaky handwriting, told a haunting story. The entries began innocently enough, accounts of daily meals, books she had read, and memories of happier times. But soon, the tone shifted. She wrote about being moved to the basement as a punishment for talking back. She described days without food, nights without heat, and long stretches of isolation. She mentioned feeling cold, scared, and unwanted. In one passage, she wrote that her grandmother told her she was too much trouble and better off, down here where no one can bother us. Investigators were stunned. Elaine's portrayal of herself as a loving, devoted caretaker was unraveling rapidly. The journal revealed months of systematic neglect and emotional torment. Lily had not simply disappeared one morning. She had been hidden away, silenced, and forgotten long before Elaine ever picked up the phone to report her missing. It became clear that the basement was not just a storage space. It was a prison, one designed to keep Lily out of sight and out of mind. Elaine had gone to great lengths to construct a life of appearances, masking the truth with Sunday smiles and neatly trimmed hedges. When confronted with the discovery, Elaine offered no explanation. She stood in silence, staring at the items. Spread across the dining table, her face expressionless. Her silence spoke volumes, The mask she had worn for years had finally slipped, and the truth, no longer buried beneath dust and shadows, had begun to surface. The question now was no longer whether Lily had suffered, but just how far Elaine had gone to ensure no one ever found out. After the chilling discovery in the basement, detectives began to examine Elaine Whitmore's behavior and finances more closely. The state of the basement had proven that Lily had suffered under her care, but it still didn't explain what had ultimately happened to the girl. Elaine continued to insist that Lily had disappeared on her own, refusing to acknowledge the journal or the evidence mounting against her. Investigators knew they were missing the final piece, the one that would either confirm Elaine's guilt or open the door to something even more horrifying. A forensic team combed through the house, looking for any additional signs of struggle, injury, or concealment. Then came a break in the case, not inside the house, but in the yard. One detective noticed how carefully arranged the garden beds were compared to the rest of the deteriorating property. The grass was overgrown, and the shutters were peeling, but the flower beds, especially the one beneath the kitchen window, were freshly planted and meticulously maintained. It didn't make sense. Elaine had previously claimed that her arthritis kept her from doing much yard work. They pulled receipts from a local landscaping store and found that 2 months earlier, Elaine had made several suspicious purchases: industrial-strength lime, a new shovel, tarp, and multiple bags of cement. When questioned, she said she had been fixing up the place for spring, but the timing didn't match. The purchases were made in late autumn, long after the gardening season had ended. A warrant was quickly secured to dig up the area of concern. Police and forensic teams arrived early one morning, keeping the operation quiet to avoid alerting neighbors. The soil beneath the roses was looser than it should have been. Within an hour of digging, they unearthed something wrapped in a faded pink blanket, buried shallowly beneath the surface. The scene went silent, as everyone present realized what they had found. The remains were badly decomposed, but the small frame, the dark hair, and the familiar clothing left little doubt. Dental records later confirmed it was Lily. The medical. Examiner's report revealed the cause of death to be starvation, complicated by untreated infections and prolonged malnutrition. There were no signs of immediate trauma, no blunt force injuries or strangulation. Instead, Lily had been slowly, painfully dying, likely during her final weeks confined in the basement. Elaine was arrested in her kitchen while preparing tea. She offered no resistance and spoke no words as officers led her away in handcuffs. She kept her head down, her expression unreadable. The community that had once embraced her watched in shock and disbelief. The woman they had trusted, the grandmother they had admired, had buried her own granddaughter in a flower bed outside her kitchen. The news sent ripples across Willowbrook. Vigils were held in Lily's memory. Parents looked at their children differently. Neighbors questioned how they had missed the signs. And through it all, Elaine never shed a tear, never spoke a word of remorse. The garden she once tended so carefully had become a graveyard of secrets, and now everyone knew. Elaine Whitmore's trial began 6 months after her arrest, held in the county courthouse just a few miles from her home. The courtroom was filled with faces from Willowbrook, neighbors, former friends, and strangers who had once admired her as the town's most caring grandmother. Now they sat in tense silence, waiting to understand why someone who seemed so kind, so loving, could commit such a cold and heartless crime. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically: the hidden basement room, Lily's journal entries, the forged homeschool documents, the security camera deliberately disconnected, and the grave in the flower bed. Each piece told a story of control, isolation, and neglect. What shocked people the most, however, wasn't just the horror of Lily's death. It was the calm, calculated way Elaine had continued her daily life afterward, as though nothing had happened. She had maintained her routine, smiled at neighbors, picked up mail, and continued collecting state assistance checks for Lily's care, even after burying the child in her own yard. Psychological evaluations described Elaine as emotionally detached and possibly delusional. She had become obsessed with control and feared being separated from Lily. She believed that no one could care for the girl as well as she could, even as she starved and mistreated her. She viewed outsiders, teachers, doctors, social workers as threats, convinced they wanted to take Lily away. But her paranoia didn't excuse her choices. It was not illness alone that led to Lily's death, but a series of deliberate decisions, made over months, even years. Elaine had opportunities to ask for help, to place Lily in proper care, to be honest about her struggle. She chose silence. The defense attempted to paint her as overwhelmed and mentally unstable, a grieving widow, pushed beyond her limits. They described a life of stress and sacrifice, trying to gain sympathy for a woman who had once been seen as a pillar of strength. But the jury found no room for sympathy. Lily's suffering had not been brief or hidden in the shadows. It had unfolded slowly, painfully, while the world around her went on, unaware. Elaine was found guilty of murder, unlawful imprisonment, and fraud. The judge called the case a tragedy wrapped in betrayal, sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout the proceedings, Elaine never spoke in her defense. She refused to explain her actions, refused to express regret. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her face unmoved. Willowbrook would never be the same. The little white house at the edge of town remained empty, its garden overgrown and lifeless. The whispers of what happened there lingered long after the trial ended. People looked at the past differently now, questioning what other secrets might lie behind closed doors. Lily's story became more than just a crime. It became a warning, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it looks like a loving grandmother with gentle hands, warm cookies and a garden full of flowers, hiding something far more terrible beneath the soil.